Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and thank you guys so much for joining me over the first couple of weeks at redvoicemedia.com, where we're doing our daily show Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And if you're coming over for the premium stuff, great. If you're not, you're about to see a portion of one of those broadcasts. That's now free, by the way, because every 2 weeks they're releasing it. But I'd encourage you guys to do what? Come on over, support the broadcast. Come over to redvoicemedia.com/Jason, subscribe, and that way you support me, you support the broadcast, and you support content like this. So, without further ado, I want to get into this interview. Again, this is just a 10-minute excerpt with former head of the FBI in LA, a guy that talked about things that people thought were crazy, high-level trafficking in DC establishments, and even satanic, occultic, ritualistic abuse of children.
But I want to talk about that civil case really quick with Larry King.
Yeah, and Paul went out and had a family, and he's I know where I was going now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Paul told me that he was recruited by this Franklin group.
And this is Paul Bonacci, by the way.
And he was 10, 11, 12 years old, and they'd use him as a decoy in parks and shopping centers and so forth to attract other children his age over near the car where the adults would be waiting, and they'd grab the kids, throw them in the back seat, and then Paul and another kid would put chloroform over their mouths, and they would put them to sleep. And Paul has admitted that he was involved in the Johnny Gosch kidnapping in West Des Moines, Iowa in I think it was 1982. And he was, according to a book called Why Johnny Can't Come Home, by the way, the Franklin cover-up book, and Why Johnny Can't Come Home is available through my website, and tedgunderson.com. And so this is how they used Paul Bonacci. So he was a critical witness, and John DeCamp sued Larry King on behalf of Paul and won a $1 million judgment against him. And John's standing on a street corner sometime later, and a stranger walks up to him, stands next to him, and says, "If you ever collect that $1 million, you won't live to spend it." John's life has been threatened. He had a nice home in Lincoln, and two couples came in their car, drove in the driveway. His oldest daughter was there in the yard. They drove over the puppy, and back and forth, and they told the oldest daughter, "If your dad doesn't back off, we're going to do this to you and your sisters and brothers." So John ended up moving to a small town in Nebraska, about 35 miles south of Lincoln, called Claytonia, Clatonia, Nebraska. 296 people in Claytonia. And I might add that John's been down there about 13, 14 years. And in May of 2006, a little over a year and a half ago, I was in a condominium in Las Vegas, and I won't go into details, but I was basically being poisoned through the air in my condominium. And I called John and I said, "John, I'm moving to Oregon." He says, "No, come out here, I'll take care of you."
So DeCamp, I believe, is also no longer with us. This was towards the end of Gunderson's life. I don't know that he lived another, maybe another 5 years after this. Okay, so they're talking about Lawrence King. They're talking about high-level trafficking within the Republican Party at the time, and basically, talking about threats on their lives after the fact. Well, let's see. Do we actually have? Oh, what do we got here? Pat Miletich. Oh, Pat Miletich also going to be on Red Voice Media.
So I live in this small town also with John DeCamp, not with him, but I live down the street, about 2 blocks down the street from him. And I had to move to a small town so I can really take care of myself. I had arsenic and cyanide in me. I was suspicious. My blood pressure was shooting way up. And it was so serious, it was like 242 over 119. And what I think happens is that this evil element in our government, and it has to be our government because private enterprise is in business to make money. This doesn't make them money. This costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars. But they make the money off the children and off of their drugs and off of their prostitution, what have you. They make the mafia look like a Sunday school class. Okay? So I think what happens is they were giving me poison in the air from the condo next door and a condo across the hall. It was causing my blood pressure to go up. Now I'm on blood pressure pills, by the way. And I've always had 120/70, always my whole life, and all of a sudden it shoots up. Well, what this does, it creates a situation where you have a heart attack or a stroke. And I think that's the way they're killing a lot of the patriots around the country, by giving them poison. And then they say, oh, they died of a natural cause. I caught on. I'd be sitting at my desk and I couldn't think. I didn't know where I was. So I said, there's something wrong with me. I went down and had this blood test. Again, arsenic cyanide.
Wow. Why don't you talk a little bit about the drug running aspect of the Franklin cover? Because that was in there, and that kind of shocked me that they were using these kids kind of as drug mules.
Yes, they were using these kids to haul drugs all over the world. And Alicia Owens said that she would leave in the morning, Omaha in the morning, and fly to Los Angeles and put a package in a locker and turn around, catch a flight back to Omaha in time to watch the Johnny Carson show. This is drugs. Paul Benassi told me that he was used as, I think they call them mules, as a mule to haul drugs all over the world. And he said he would fly into an airport, say in Los Angeles or New York, and he would meet a couple there he'd never met before, and they'd have false passports, and they would fly as a family overseas, different countries, and take drugs and haul drugs all over the world. So this involved not only prostitution, male homosexuality, prostitution, satanic activity, but also drug running.
And in closing, what can we do? You know, what can the people out there listening actually do about this information? You know, where can we go?
Well, all we can do right now, and John DeCamp has done this. He wrote the book, The Franklin Cover-Up. He's exposed it. By the way, John's book, Franklin Cover-Up, the mainstream media, the mainstream bookstores will not handle the book. They don't handle the book. John has distributed it out of his office. It's available through me or through John DeCamp, tedgunderson.com. And John sold like 180,000 copies of his book from his right out of his law office. What can we do? I don't know. All I can do is expose it. I've dedicated my life to exposing it, and my life's been crazy. What's happened to me, the poisoning, and I've had contracts on me. I've had hitmen waiting for me, and disinformation. I'm the victim of extensive disinformation program by FBI informant Stu Webb, and by the way, he is an informant, and so forth. Not an awful lot we can do except just keep working and keep exposing it. You folks out there need to pick up the book and read it, buy it and read it, send it to your friends. And there's another interesting development on this Franklin cover-up case.
Before we go, this is the follow-up book, The Franklin Scandal. DeCamp may no longer be with us, but DeCamp's book is great. I mean, it's horrifying, but it's very well done. This has a bibliography in it with so many firsthand eyewitness accounts, police reports, FBI reports, where this guy was going in, Nick Bryant, to try to disprove the things that Gunderson's talking about right now via the Franklin scandal, to try to disprove the original book, The Franklin Cover-Up. So this is another tool. This is out, I believe, 2008 or 9, years after this interview.
Which I left off, by the way. The Yorkshire TV people in England came into the United States for some 7 months with a team and did a documentary. That documentary was to be aired on May the 3rd, 1994, and it was actually listed in the TV Guide, and all of a sudden it was not aired. A certain congressman bought up the rights, ordered all copies destroyed. And I happen to have obtained a bootleg copy of the show through John DeCamp. It was sent to him anonymously. And I have distributed that far and wide. I've sold copies of it for years now.
And by the way, that is Conspiracy of Silence. And you can still find, I mean, it's on YouTube, amongst other places. On my program, we've done watch-alongs, we've shown excerpts, we've actually showed you a lot of the mainstream reporting that goes further than that. And in Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, we talk about the Barney Frank aspect of that.
And here about a year ago, I received a letter from an organization in London, and they said that the property belonged to them, and if I continued to sell the show, that they would sue me. And now, to prove that there's a manipulation of the records, I ordered a copy of the TV Guide for that date, May the 3rd, 1994. And although it was listed at one time in the TV Guide, the copy that I received, years later, it was not in that publication. It had been taken out. So they reprinted the whole book just to get rid of that one entry into the TV Guide for that date. And I find that very interesting. These are very powerful people. This is the Illuminati. The Illuminati wants to rule the world, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. They've infiltrated virtually every level of society, and including the prosecutors' offices, the judgeships, industry, politics, Washington, D.C., the White House, and it's very serious. It's very serious. I'm afraid that it's so serious that we may have already lost our country.
Hey, everybody.
So there you go. That is, man, that was when I had 31,000 subscribers. We're at 70,000. And by the way, I put that up years ago, but that's obviously from many years earlier. Now, you think to yourself, drug running, Satanism, come on, Jason, Illuminati. Look, I stick to what I can prove. That's why I put a disclaimer there. But there were so many aspects that panned out that were true via what Ted Gunderson was saying. You can't ignore the guy. And one of the things we've done in this country, and why I say we, I mean the actual deep state, I mean the actual military-industrial complex, is that we've conducted human experiments on people's minds with all sorts of horrific methods, including electrodes, electric shock into people's brains to try to brainwash them. Brainwashing, actually a terminology that comes out of the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay? So you look at this stuff and you say, it's impossible. Well, this is a, again, small clip from a old school investigative news report, one of the big three. I'm not sure if it's ABC, NBC, or CBS, but I did a whole series. It was like an hour-long documentary. This is a small clip from that documentary, and this is just a minuscule amount of what people will do to other human beings under the guise of authoritarianism. Really, of saying you're the authority, you're going to do this. You're working in a government program. You could be part of a university. You could be part of a pharmaceutical company, which many of them were. Creates the circle of plausible deniability, gives them the authority over other human life.
Covering a span of history such as we are in this report, one can get sidetracked by the so-called glamour and mystery of espionage work or by the exotic qualities of some drugs. But what you can't lose sight of is what all of this would mean in terms of individual human beings. There would be deaths, there would be long-lasting and harmful effects.
The best-known case is that of this man, Frank Olson, a chemist employed by the Army Chemical Corps
who in 1953 was slipped LSD unknowingly at a meeting with CIA officials. Shortly after that, Olson went into severe depression. He ended his life at this New York hotel by diving through a shaded closed window in his 10th floor room. Frank Olson was the first known fatality in the CIA's LSD program. Olson left behind a widow, Alice, and 3 children, but it would be years before they learned the real story of his death. Shortly after his suicide, Alice Olson was visited by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the man who had administered the drug, and by...
Now, let me just stop this right here. Gottlieb, boy, you dig into him. Not a great guy. Did some pretty horrific things. You dig into this, and you wonder whether or not Olson actually committed suicide. There's actually been big History Channel specials just on Frank Olson and this incident. This goes into a lot more.
Robert Lashbrook, his deputy, who was the last person with Frank Olson the night of his death.
It was probably to check me out and see whether I was handling myself and handling the situation, whether I was hysterical. And I'm sure they left the house feeling ever so much better because I had been gracious and hospitable to them, so that I must have played right into their hand and made them feel fine.
23 years later, how did you feel about that meeting?
My anger was unbelievable at how I had been duped for this length of time, and the anguish which was unnecessary.
Anyone who knew during all of those years never told Alice Olson the real story of her husband's death. She would discover it by accident more than 2 decades later. In essence, it was a 22-year-long cover-up. Lyman Kirkpatrick was Inspector General of the CIA at the time of Frank Olson's death. But had not the Olson case occurred within the secret confines of the CIA, would not this case have been a prosecutable case? Perhaps manslaughter?
I would think definitely prosecutable, and certainly from the point of view of of Mr. Olson, why it should probably have been actionable.
Frank Olson's suicide slowed down the CIA's testing of LSD and other drugs, but only momentarily. The CIA was not the only government agency interested in the possibilities LSD and other drugs presented for mind control.
Let me just stop that right there. LSD and other drugs, LSD and other drugs. They constantly want to highlight LSD because it made it into the public arena, and it was actually popularized via popular culture and pop culture in general. It was normalized. If you saw the long list of actual drugs that they used, you'd be like, why in the world are they just talking about LSD? And again, that's part of the limited hangout control mechanisms. We talked about G. Edward Griffin, we talked about the CFR, we talked about the media operations. Well, like mockingbirds for the Central Intelligence Agency, let's emphasize the LSD thing, marginalizing what people think actually occurred in this program, and other drugs, and other drugs.
The Army Chemical Corps first started working with the CIA and then branched off on its own. It too tested drugs on unwitting victims, and a death would result. The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. Since the initial news stories of Harold Blower's death, close to 5,000 documents, previously classified, have been released by the Army and obtained by ABC News. They provide valuable insight into Army activities at the time of Blower's death and where the Army went from there with their own drug testing program.
So again, that's also why it's important to understand that these are intergovernmental organizations. The CIA utilizes the Army, the Navy, the Marines, NASA. Okay? They utilize what? The university system. the medical system, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, private industry. All right, so important.
From a previously classified deposition of Dr. James Cattell, who administered the mescaline derivative, on the purpose of the drug testing, to produce symptoms similar to those that you see in schizophrenia, on how much the patient knew about all this. We didn't delineate all the possibilities of what might happen because then you contaminate your experiment. Cattell,
In other words, we didn't tell them. I love they use those Bernaysian talking points, even then, total semantics.
then relates that he never even knew what drug he had given Harold Blauer because of the secrecy of the Army experiments. We didn't know whether it was dog piss. This was secret. This was a secret. We weren't in on it.
Compartmentalization. You don't even know what you're administering to your patients. Your patients. In other words, guinea pigs. Because, again, when you get to the top of this predator class, when you even get to mid-tier sociopaths like Henry Kissinger, like big deals in how we conduct foreign policies, big deals in these NGO organizations, these roundtable groups, etc. They don't look at you as human. You're cannon fodder, right? You're a dumb animal. You're to be controlled. They're the social Darwinists. They're not doing these experiments on Prince Charles and company. You get what I'm saying here?
We asked Blauer's daughter Elizabeth for her reaction.
What? How can anybody react to that? I mean, that is so far from what you'd expect from a human being, never mind a doctor, never mind a professional specialist who's supposed to care about people's minds.
And this is another big reason we should never let psychiatry take control of our society. We already see what doctors have done in the last 2.5, now almost 3 years via this COVID 1984 nightmare. Not to be trusted. Shouldn't have trusted them before. Doesn't mean there's not good doctors. But the medical establishment, you make me want to puke. You make me want to vomit. Okay? Disgusting. You let the psychiatrists take hold. Forget about it. That's part of the transhuman agenda, is to get this whole transgender agenda moving via psychology and psychiatrics, and then move into the legal arena, and then move you away from human form altogether. It's not just hormones they're going to pump you with. It's not just crazy surgery they're going to do to you. They want nanobots in your body, in your nervous system, in your brain. They want to take hold of your very essence, your spirit, your soul. That's the spiritual aspect of this.
It's unbelievable.
A suit filed by Elizabeth Barrett against the Army Chemical Corps is now pending in federal court. Other Army experiments continued on mental patients around the country. Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs, hallucinogenics, and electrodes implanted in the brain.
Oh, electrodes implanted in the brain. Oh, just gonna do a little electrode implantation. No big deal. Let's talk about LSD. Let's not talk about the medical institutions that did this to people. Let's talk about LSD.
The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. These are various progress reports written by Dr. Monroe and recently obtained by ABC News. From one of the progress reports, a report of a woman who had electrodes implanted in the brain and was then given LSD and other drugs. She became agitated, cried, lapsed into a trance-like state. Felt as if she were about to have a convulsion, experienced waves of darkness and light, had bizarre sensations in her neck and legs, said somebody was trying to manipulate her body. At this point, Dr. Monroe wrote, that the woman was obviously having paranoid ideas. As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
The therapeutic effect would be indirect. In other words, we're not trying to help this person. That's not what these experiments were about, Jack. Where's Nancy? Can't help myself. Where's Nancy? And now they have expertly been able to take these small pockets of mind control, not just the electrodes, the brain chips, right? All this stuff that they're now pushing, but massive psychological warfare. Really, by even media presentations like this. LSD and other drugs. LSD and other drugs. I mean, this is a great media piece for the time. Still very, very good. Better than most things that you'll see today. But think about, you're looking at a guy who's running experiments with the U.S. government of putting electrodes in people's brains and drugging the shit out of them. Okay, and he's just like, well, the therapeutic value would be indirect. Oh, thank you. Indirect. Totally fine.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medication, and they took
specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they were going to they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war.
See that little cackle? That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war. The inversion of reality. By torturing people, we're going to save humanity. Remember that collectivism I talked about? Got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. That's the mindset. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining us on that premium portion of the broadcast that's now free. So please consider supporting the broadcast over at redvoicemedia.com/Jason. We're going to keep kicking out the jams. And I also want to remind everybody that I am a documentary filmmaker, and all of my films are free and meant to be shared. Loose Change Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order to Find, and Shade the Motion Picture. Please watch them, share them, and come on over to Red Voice Media 4 days a week for the Bermas Brigade and shouting out some reality rants.